This video was produced by
Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're just excited to see you all. I always worry that we won't have an audience for our poets, and we always have a great audience. And so happy to see all of you out. And this is 3 times the charm, as you probably know. We have been trying to do this 2 times before. And it didn't work out, but it worked out today. We have our poet here, and we're excited. I'm Joanne Gabin, director of the Furious Flower Poetry Center, and I want to welcome you to this reading. I want to say, first of all, we are so grateful to the Center for Multicultural Student Services for sponsoring this event. And it always helps when you have partners at the university and elsewhere who help us to bring these wonderful poets to campus. So I want you all to, to be present in this reading. I want you to do it the African way, if you will. The African way is when you hear something that you really, really like, I want you to applaud. I know that our poet has presented in front of audiences that just say, nice, and however, I think today I want you to respond to the poetry. When you hear something you like, say, applaud it. When you don't, okay, But, it's the whole thing of call and response. That's what I'm talking about. I want to introduce Elizabeth Hoover, who is the assistant director of the Furious Flower Poetry Center, who will introduce our speaker. So let's bring her on.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for coming on such a beautiful day, being willing to be inside when it's 70 degrees. I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of our next reading, which is going to take place April 14th at 6:30, and it's going to be in Court Square Theater downtown. And we're really excited to have a partnership with the Court Square Theater. If you're somebody who likes to have paper, we have flyers in the back. And also we have postcards in the back that'll encourage you to save the date for our upcoming conference, which will be September 24th through the 27th, which will give you an opportunity to see Dawn again. So, as well as a lot of outstanding poets. There are a lot of ways to think about Dawn's work. By no means the only way is to think of her as an experimental writer. And as we were driving over here, we were kind of talking about all the sort of problematic ways experimental poetry is defined. And she said that she thinks about it as how much room you give your reader to participate as a co-creator of the poem. I love that because I think that poets often face the accusation of being difficult or elitist or inaccessible, but this approach is one that invites you to enter the poem on equal footing and to participate in creating meaning. I think you can also think about experimental poetry from a composition standpoint as a way to write from a position of like, why not? Or like, why? Why do we do things this way? And Dawn, in her work, tests the kind of assumptions that we've held so long. We sort of forget that we even have them. And I think she tests them and ultimately refutes them. After reading her, when I go back to my own writing, I always have a greater level of awareness of the kind of assumptions I'm working under. And it's these kind of tests and experiments that ultimately push us and the genre forward. This is true in her poetry as well as in her politics. Dawn was a co-founder of the Third Wave Foundation, who has a mission to bring young women, transgender and gender non-conforming young people into the feminist movement and address systemic gaps in philanthropic giving. She's involved in the experimental art making collective, the Black Took Collective, and she just recently collaborated with How Do You Say Yam in African, which is a art making collective. Is that a good way to say it? Yeah.
We're an art collective.
You're an art collective. And she contributed a libretto to their experimental film, which was in the Whitney Biennial.
Still.
It's still in the Whitney Biennial. We have her books, A Gathering of Matter, A Matter of Gathering, and Discipline on sale in the back. She also just did a limited run chapbook, which the bookstore can't get, and technically we can't sell, but you might want to just talk to Dawn about it afterwards, see what she has to say about it. So I want you to welcome Dawn. I have to admit, Dawn, I don't always know what you're saying in your work, but I'm always really glad you're saying it. Dawn Lundy Martin.
Do folks usually stand here or over here?
You want me to pull this up? To drag it out.
That would be great, so I can put this, yeah.
You got it? Strong.
Thank you.
Well, how's that? Is that something?
Yeah, that's good. Can you hear me in the back if I talk at this level? Thank you. I mean, it's not every day that your introduction ends with, I don't understand what she's saying. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm glad I could finally be here. And I'll say, just to kind of add to what Joan was saying about response, is that, the response doesn't always have to be, in this case, I'll say, applause. It can be anything else, it could be other kinds of sounds or gestures. Because there may be moments that where like isn't the right word, as opposed to, you might feel something or that might cause you some disturbance. So that said, I'm going to start actually by reading to you from the chapbook, which is my most recent publication. It's called The Main Cause of the Exodus. And I'll tell you a little about it. So when I'm working with my graduate students, I often give them assignments to, prompting assignments via which they'll create new work. And this is from a long, kind of 2-week-long assignment that I gave them, and they were supposed to have 8 to 10 poems by the end of those 2 weeks. And one of the things that we were doing is thinking about how to use borrowed text. Like, how do you kind of incorporate research into a poem? What are some strategies for doing that? So they had to do some research. One of the things that they had to research was something about the way the body functions. Like, say when you're, swallowing, what actually happens to the throat? What happens to the rest of the, kind of digestive process? So anything that has to do with the body, it could be even in the brain, which is a part of the body, right? So some people went to kind of pathology, is what happens when you're sad, what happens to your brain. And then we tried to figure out a way of working with that text, and I did this with them. And it ended up being more than 8 to 10 poems. It ended up being this chapbook. And what I was researching, I ended up kind of stumbling upon this article in the New York Times. It was from, the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was called, it was about these little quote, colored orphans in this orphanage in Brooklyn, New York. But it was like a puff piece kind of about, how happy all of the orphans were and how they were always singing in the orphanage. And then the thing that I researched in addition to that was what happens to the body when one sings. And then I kind of did additional research, some kind of 19th century scientific racism stuff makes its way in here. So that's just my introduction. I'm going to read this. It's a short book, but I'll read the poems. They're mostly prose poems. They're untitled, so only the book is titled. And sometimes the poems actually look weird. They look like, I don't know if you can see it, but sometimes they are it goes across the page and also down the page. And I think you'll be able to hear some of the text that's borrowed, even though it's sometimes manipulated. Main cause of the Exodus. I, a dead woman, hunt leaves as might a child, swing up through my own lack, my own chaos, hurt staged in the lung. They ask me of the paralytic, of the collapsed upper aperture. But what of this human need, mouths my mute? The eye, radiant in heat, polish. I am closing my legs now, subsiding against graffitied wall, pinched to hold up. I must be a high fashion fucking model. This Negro type is ancient. The Egyptian monuments demonstrate its existence 4,000 years ago. Unless the physiography of the landscape changes profoundly, the Negro type will probably exist here 4,000 years hence. Land divides despite shine of skin, opens itself infinite or a howl, too many bodies to count. Or how wonder works. When I am squatting to retrieve a cup of vaginal blood and bearing down, as the instructions say, as in defecation, I am wondering. Industrial children held, territory forgotten, territory bludgeoned. Why are all the children bound? They are all musicians. Continual mouth breathing can affect the inner ear. Without good hearing, the controlling factor of correct attack and good pronunciation is lost. Their pleasant asylum, and which contains entertainments, shaken, mumbled something, was supposed to be names, translated, in whose service the pet, a kind white woman, in whose service rescue. It is wonderful the volume of sound that seemed to be hidden away in those small, dusky bodies. In the dream, the black dog sobs and cries, "Mommy," his hurt so profound he cannot stand up. His legs splay out across the linoleum floor. My brother has all his teeth removed after significant rotting. We fist pump at the game and hoot. The sobbing becomes the air. We close storefronts, drop down to ground, pull our knees up to face, agitate, the microphones say, but no one moves. When they said they split me in two, I was overjoyed, wanting to get at the rip of things. How to inhabit the sensation of living. We are without allegiance. We are royal in our independence. When the eye speaks, it speaks into another's speech. This is a labor. Next to her, a learned man is gray and wearing comfortable shoes. He does not think about the shoes, he simply wears them. He seeps. It's impossible to determine the monument of his instructional value. They can't figure out why the rapes keep happening. Blood point of needle, carnal hovering. It is we who say they were protected and at the same time fetish. I between theological mishaps, evident national orders. Another thing entirely to be a mother. Open gull mouth, stuff in charcuterie. Forlorn is the limp of neck gazing up. In border state body, body as seen. Oh, happening, happening. I refuse melody. I open my unfit beak, its perfect script, the wide nostrils agape for proper channel of admission. You enter the space, your body is approximation form, its sensibilities. There are supplies of all sorts on hand, quinine, calomel, hypophosphates, and even cod liver oil are some of the remedies that keep the little colored orphans and half orphans and destitute children in proper physical condition. Red surface bumps speed up wind property, and before marked, we, the only evidence. To be a nice why, is perhaps to be the nicest thing on earth. To be in memory, destructive impulses, a worship in the side room of the mind. Survival skills liturgy, except who was taken? We want to imagine our connections like sweet water, except the possibility of complete missingness of the person. All the time now on the streets, beings suddenly laughter, bursts of grief roll, indiscriminately limp fits. Sometimes in spite of myself, the word God. A book is nothing, they say. A want to theorize this phrase, but then flesh just gone. Tisa tells me about the coming dirt shortage. When the eye speaks accosted, excerpt from temperament, one is not allowed temperament, especially for a body that is already gesture and antagonism a wig. The most threatening physique is wiry. Something felt in relation to it, feeling as in an imagination or a creation or a repetition. Feeling is a lodging, a human living form that is a bark. My wood barks into the night, strains holding in consumption. Your pink bubbly babies are safe. Everyone is safe. Which is an offering and which is a laceration? It doesn't matter. You just present yourself or happen into the room and perspectives all around you. A glassy-eyed woman tells you to hush. A tall man takes your cocktail from your hand and tosses it into the trash. Excerpt the noun and place it next to a vowel. Wreck your immediate world and watch the aftermath. The walls of the room are white and short. In it, you claw because there is nothing else to do. Who's listening? The portrait of the man framed in gold leaf? It is not the word body that's the problem, it's the physical thingness of it, the hump. For thousands of years, there lies behind one race, one dreary, unrelieved, monotonous chapter of ignorance, nakedness, superstition, savagery. When we encounter the savage, we are in reverie. This is precision joy, concomitant stroking. Are you me, or is this our jackal face? Oh, I love it. I love us. Let me make a comparison. The jackal face akin to my father beating me with a soup spoon. I'm so unruly. Without invitation, the eye is left to encounter an aged woman. All her useless parts hang from the falcon's mouth. Chasm of impertinence to exist so lackluster, draining out. After a vaginal examination, they determined that her uterus was enlarged, her vagina overabundantly moist, but her long and tumid clitoris was the telltale sign of nymphomania. We look up into your void and experience crisis, rapid formulations on the screen, and in some other kind of genius, you don't understand the medical therapy or the ways the East Village has more rats than other places in the city. Lie down. It's illegal to lie down under duress. Stiffen. It's against the law to stiffen when being attacked. Instead, to be quartered and rip off in trying so hard not to remember. Proof of locality, rendition of hardness. From before they say, my father, and had no vocation, and labored, workhorse. Because the black, which race is God, no one asks. We are very hardy. In the space of irreconciliation, you know, my father worked 16 hours every day, never complained, never got sick, went to work with a dearth arm. What if they posture sadness? I was illustrative, an example angled toward proof. I was biologically female, but that was of no use. Whose holes are these, begs one. Another dives into the being and refuses to come out. This is the invalid position, a waking up in the spirit of another. The Irish, the Iberian, and the Negro are of low prognathous type. Less petting and more disciplining is needed. Fewer academies and more workbenches. What is the sound of sounds sounding indefinite fist and face again, and sound of the surprise of it coming from nowhere, of breaking the arm on a small breaking the arm on a small fall in your own house, a respiratory failure, wound opening like a little mouth. We inhabit the brutal. We are shattered every day. We look askew, head broken, floor array, light array, great distances, life goals. Staked upon every border, guardians. Protections have many faces. Misuse of the face as a streaming desire. Solution posted, get rid of all the niggers. The state exacts its controls. That the pepper spray happens against kneeling children. That the search for the secret leaker is unyielding. If you want, you can make a myopic focus, concentrate on a shown shadow, or drift off into space. This tendency, if persisted, will probably, in the end, prove disastrous to the advancement of the colored race, since there is but the slightest prospect that the race will be lifted to a higher plane of civilization. Girl, tell me, how did you come here? You were supposed to create a situation in which belonging seems imperative. Better, perhaps, the hovering between borders until a hole opens up and you see a tiny crystal inside your gut. For days, I feel a small knot in my bladder as if carrying something. They say it's nothing. Girl, you are not beautiful like the others. Your hair, everything. It's the magnetism I seek. To secure us, we hear of foiled terror plots, other threats to the nation. The length of a body from suffering, the length of my vacation swimming pool. Crisp, wake, pop, pop, tatters fall from sky. This is a phenomenon worldwide. The sad psychic sends you non-urgent notes as if to say, do you mind me telling you things? How the body holds or does not hold. Apollo Belvedere, Negro, young chimpanzee. When the rains come, we hear unmemory cloaking its needs, wants to burst accordingly akin to wire tugging at the teeth. Keep the lips shut, the wicked say. We labor in our attempts at rebirth, remain inside enclosure, wood box, felt mostly in legs becoming sausage pipes. We stand again with our heads hanging outside apartment windows, hope to catch breath, to redo trained breath, heavy, quick work. We expect the baby deer to die before a certain age. Who? Willing force, food security. On corners, the Jehovah's Witnesses in bad suits and conviction. A window, they say, and draw the shades. I will not sing to you. I refuse to sing to you. That's from that book. Thank you. Thank you. I should have warned you that that was going to be a long bit. You're probably like, oh my gosh, a long bit. Okay, I'm going to read some, I'll read you a couple of poems. I'm reading kind of in reverse order. Actually, I'll read to you from my first book, so it's not really in reverse order. So these are individual poems, and I'll say that the very first poem, which I'll start with, actually ends up being a beginning for my next book. Even though it's the last poem that I wrote for A Gathering of Matter, but it ends up being the first poem in this book and begins a kind of thinking about what's going to happen in discipline. And it happens that my father, many years ago now, it seems not like that long ago, had a debilitating cancer of the blood. So he was dying for about 2 years. And so this poem that I'll read to you first was attending to that in some way. We had a kind of complicated relationship. It was kind of like, it's one of those things where like you don't really understand the person until after they're gone, that kind of thing we're familiar with. So formally, I'll say that there's a kind of surrealist aspect to this poem in that there's a question and then there's an answer. You won't be sure who is speaking. And sometimes the question doesn't attend directly to the answer. It's called Last Days. What is the relation between figure A and figure B? This is what the Father has become. That which is gone already? 2 feet, white with calluses, miasmic. Who breathes in the room? A girl on the bed, a daughter. Only one then? They won't deliver him to her, her palms, little petals. Untouched? Untouched, yes. Will they arrive then? The wilting body is unmade on a soiled bed. What color is the cusp of absence? A selfish collection of coins in the dresser drawer. Mine come that way. A redefinition of what smell is. Is there a horrible thing? There are A and B and some curtains drawn tight to lock the room. There is the scent that I will remember for many years. This is what happens before the figure disappears. A row of unkept stones they call heroes. How is the pain endured? A stem of grass imagined when it is not raining, all those things called intentions, the private treasures one keeps safe. I actually want to take a moment to kind of give you some kind of insight into this poem, which is so something like a row of there are just these images. It's kind of like an elliptical kind of image. The kind of elliptical quality that images have in your mind when they happen. And so something like my father was buried in the kind of a military cemetery. He was older than my mother, and they had me really late. So he was, he was almost 80 when he died. I think 70 maybe. But anyway, so he was buried in this military cemetery, and so something like a row of unkept stones they call heroes. That's the only bit. Like that other part could be the whole story, but that's the only bit that makes its way into the poem, which is kind of how this poem functions. So the rest of this book is really, a friend of mine, I was working at a theater when I was in graduate school, and a friend of mine who was the director of the theater asked me if I would write a piece to kind of, he wanted to invite some poets, you know, different kind of aesthetic approaches to the stage, and he wanted to kind of, you know, take his artistic directorial lens to the presentation of this work. And I'll read you a part of a piece from that experiment, right? So I say that because I was thinking about, the poem kind of opens up, and it's when I first begin to write longer poems, because I'm actually thinking about the stage. And what's weird is that I never stop writing longer poems after this, right? So, you know, this like weird moment that compels me to do this. And the way that he staged it was, you know, stark. So I'm sitting in a chair on the stage, kind of like, you know, facing this way. All the lights are out, and there's this, there's just this bright light shining on me. And then there's a projection of some of the language on a screen so that you can kind of see the layout of the poem in certain places. And then there's this kind of littering on the stage of the actual pages, because it was in a manuscript form at the time. So there's not that much happening, but it's very stark and precise. I'm going to read you, like all of these poems really, I mean, they're all dystopic. They all kind of attend to racial identity in some way. My mentor, maybe I'll just talk, I won't read it all. Maybe my mentor when I was a graduate student, the very first time when I did my MFA, said, you know, some of us are always, you know, we have obsessions, we're always kind of writing through those obsessions, and so we just like keep coming back to like the same thing in a different way. And I feel like that, you know, I think she said that to me because she says that about my work. So I'll read you the poem that's more directly about, or part of it that's more directly about race, and then I'll read you the poem that's more directly about gender. They're kind of mirrors of each other. After drowning. And I swear a lot. I swear a lot in all this work, so I just want to, you know, if you close your ears if you're sensitive listeners. After drowning. She curdles in the crawl, could lactate, only stopping when the being is full up. Pinned in with foul with fur, dereliction impossible, yet the thing, the one absolution from the designed body, as if one could locate here in the barnyard a logic, a wonder, a stabbing toward datum corpus. What is it like to feel female explicitly? A body that feeds, is food, is gnawed on. One that kneels, a facilitator, organized joy, a corporeal caving in, arranging the joist, cooing. She said, when I fuck them, I think I can make them love me. I said, when I fuck them, I think I can get something back. What is mumbled after the act? After the craving empties. When viscosity permeates a life before, magenta, and falling there, through sound, through tape, a voice ghostly, saying blackly, I bleed. This is what it takes. I hear it now, know it. There was once a time when the bridge ended and the girl leapt. There was once a singing somewhere. Once upon the unsung, the ripped and the extracted, one would arrive at thinning trees. The trees are almost naked. Opening of leaves and thick scents, one would be summoned there and anchored there. believe that one travels in articulation, is heavy with language, is hunted, breathes and hears black bitch and black ass in the literal field of the carnivorous. What would be sought for and fetched? One's desire accumulates in pustules. A precise dictation occurs inside the chest. It is a reckoning with a kind of God, a kind of believing. Wizened plastic wire sings a terrible lullaby. The body will open, will become slippery, slope over into exigent sickness. Reeds will recede, caps will lift, and in the heart of it, she will lie down on newly woven cloth and scrub what has already been scrubbed, a gentle body, smooth from touch. Wide eyes, all white and glistening, gradual induction into a bare, still damped, secreting pact. The body hammered. Awoken to the second door, the closed one, she focuses on the sofa's hem, unlatches the rung of locks, rejecting catapult. It was a brown room, wood-paneled, an attic room, cut into by the glaring television, paired like sleeves, stank as funk stinks, as the nearly dead, as the red, as dripping old eyes. It was a late December sky. The hallway led to the bathroom, the waiting, a tall glass, my departing. Thanks. Thank you. This is its reflection piece. I will read. It is medium length. The undress. I'll skip a little bit of it too in the middle. The undress. They say erased. Someone once said, once sung, a lament for the destruction of the beautiful. Emblem brandished upon entrance into tribe. He spoke 2 words I did not understand. I think he said, it's hateful, or it happened. That the body trespassed, troped, made haven, made him awful, deeply recognized. He unraveled, epithelium peeled, pelted first, then simply removed. He was what some might call, would most likely call, an ugly black man. To dance, he thought, in the cover of night, finally unseen. He wore robes. He untied his robes. Let them fall gracefully to the floor. Some kind of spiral, he thought. Some kind of mirror for my lakes of grief. They say betrayal. He had undone it, reversed time, and made no allowances, poured it all into a stinking black bowl. What human form sleeves out of, an imagining outside itself, a grasping of the garrote, a phylum called unsatisfactory. The meat is work. Porous skin finally gone, gouged. He no longer sings gospel, but hums silently in his head, what I have done, what I have done. One can hear it falling, packed out of order, racing in a circumference to be not forgotten. Upon driving on an absent road, the body shivers, resonates itself, dittos for a moment. Incision cut, niggardly, whimsical, and let go. Pleads, let me go. Struggles with wretchedness, attempts to scream, curls back into, settles, settles as a butterfly would. I am unpractical, wanting desire, not to be fragrant, to be raw, a bone, not to bend, to slumber. They say, love your body, love yourself. Have seen the blur of it, have endured cosmology as a crack on a wall endures flawlessness. When the basement sweats, a mental note, the body is not indestructible. Click. One can create erosion. Oh, my tin cup is too full. It smothers, I stumble, stammer the word strings. When the wax dries finally alongside the glass, what rises when the dead are buried? It happened. Someone happened. We might call it a happening. Breathing, living beings gathered, brought together as if drunk, as if unbroken, as if able to speak against, fraught with, washed over. Somewhere, a dog stands alone on a street at night. In the war, a woman soldier is taken hostage and no one will say what happened. There are empty hands, pissing, a matter of folding clothes, of waiting. When we are lost and mute, when we are sold into strangeness, hole dug in, strong desire to speak, categories of silence, asphyxiation, bloating from here, asphalt, mouth full of bees, the body castrate, a bright white day, if only a signal of breaking, does it splinter in reverence? In increments, a seeping that multiple hands will attempt to cover. There are mothers who are already buried. There are mothers who never sung. Thanks. Thank you. I'll just read a couple short pieces from Discipline. Discipline is a book of prose poems. It's my last published book. So there's a lot of, I read the three short pieces that seem to echo some of the stuff that I've already read. That way there'll be a kind of natural conversation. So I'll read one piece about my father, one piece about prayer, and then, I don't know. Okay, so I'll read a piece about my mother that I never read, actually. I guess I'll start. I saw the piece about my mother, so I guess I'll start there. So again, these are prose poems. Oh, this is a piece about my father. So this is a piece, they're all entitled, so I'll just read it. So tell me, it sings, how can I live forever when a man is trapped as words are trapped in the defect of the body, when hundreds of untold stories make the body convex, ape out, indulge in excess so that the mouth is never empty, when the grass of youth is so far away, a tale of a tale of a tale, when thinning out drags the skin, when a life so small it is disremembered, scant and numbered, framed by ritual, the steps to the cellar refrigerator, the heaves of breath, and the particular and unordinary love for a daughter more than a reach away, when derelict is as wasting away, when sleeves of abandon mask the face, when one speaks into drapes and wind, whispers against drift unheard, when almost everything, every small and huge thing is in one room, one insubstantial place covered by a roof that leaks through a gun hole when thunderous rain, when it is this life and there is the infrequent kiss of the absent daughter, and There is the singular desire of not forever maybe, but just one more minute after minute, when there simply is. Thanks. When I was growing up, my brother was really like, I have a brother who's 7 years older than me, and he was, but it's like we're the same age because he did really stupid shit all the time. And one of the things that he did that ends up in that poem is that he skipped school and invited some of his friends over, but he couldn't, his friends were getting really rowdy and he couldn't control them, and so he went in my father's closet and got, it could have ended really horribly, and got a shotgun. And the boys run in the bathroom, and my brother makes a mistake and shoots a hole in the ceiling that goes through the roof of the house. And we plug it, of course, with newspaper. I just love that makes its way, for some reason I can't even comprehend, into the poem. Now I feel bad reading the poem about my brother. I read the poem about prayer. If there is a prayer, there is a mother kneeling, hands folded to a private sign. We recognize it. If there is a mother kneeling, hands attent, she is praying, or she is crying, or crying and praying at the same time. Although it is recognized, the signals of it, it is private and no one knows, perhaps not even she, the content of the prayer and perhaps its object. If there is a mother praying, she is on her knees over some object, as she does not often pray in the middle of the room. One prays at the window or over the bed, the head bent slightly up or down, the eyes open or closed. This is a prayer for prayers, a wanting something equal to a prayer, even though I am not a mother. Last poem. Yeah, I'll just, I'll continue with these poems that I just read have kind of repetition in them. So I'll read one more that has a kind of repetition in them. These are probably the only ones in the book that do this work, so I'll just stick to it. It's the last poem. It's actually my friend Lisa Jarneau. It was an exercise that I kind of borrowed the gesture of the first two lines from her. However, the Williamsburg Bridge. I should say, I tried to end this book optimistically. The work is so dark sometimes, so you can tell me if that's a success. Sometimes I'm just like, no, it's not happy at the end. What are you talking about? However, the Williamsburg Bridge, its tenacious being, and however that I walked before it, could have been me, of course, rousing the specificity of things that happen in darkness, or however cathedrals were made and seats for holiness, as if the body could be contained. These are the dirtiest bodies, mackerel and other fish, could be latched up, unregarded, untenacious, where the dancers might go to die. And however humble or saying, Christ, forgive me, there it is, the Williamsburg Bridge, slim as learning, a terminal medication, and the words, try, and honey, I'm listening, I swear. However, the bridge, the forgotten bridge, mushrooming in revision, a real stinker in relation to its prescient cousins, the unknowing, the dumb. Thank you.
I'm glad we have a few moments to unpack some of what you've heard, and while you're thinking of your questions and your comments, I just want to thank the faculty who came out today to be with us. Thank you, Lori and Lori Cutchins and Annette Federico and Molly Godfrey and Judy Cohen. And I also want to thank Merle Winger, who is a part of our Ford, who came out, and Stan Galloway, who came all the way from Bridgewater to be with us. So I've paused a little bit. I hope I didn't miss anyone. Your questions. I want to start with one, and while you're thinking of one, the body is so present. This corporal images. How did I'm wondering? Did you plan to be a biology major? I mean, the images of the body are so present. From the very beginning, from that amazing chapbook.
Thank you.
About the colored children in that orphanage. All the way to the very end, the pieces about your father and your mother. All of those pieces carry those images. They're so pronounced. I have to mention it. And what is all of that about?
I mean, the kind of physical apparatus that we can carry around is, I mean, you know, it's like the obsession that is not an obsession for all of us, I think, that we don't really think about. You know, we think about the body when it's like, you know, under attack or when it goes wrong or when it feels pleasure, right? Our own bodies. But it's like the way that we, you know, the interaction between individual bodies, individual human, the very physicality is both, you know, like how we think we know the other person or the other. And it's actually that interaction that I'm obsessed with in the work that I'm writing now, because it is the interaction that also, you know, is the impetus for cruelty, for oppression, for thinking we know what lies underneath that physical form, right? It's like, you know, like if we had no bodies, if we were just like all kind of, you know, floating around, would we have a kind of notation for physical difference, right? No. Maybe some other kind of difference, but that wouldn't be present. It's just, you know, so I think that that's really my kind of way into thinking about this, you know, this kind of, not only the body, but I've been thinking a lot lately too about like how, you know, Hortense Spiller says, you know, and she says something like, you know, there's a kind of summary that won't do it justice, but you know, that slavery reduced the black body to flesh. And so, you know, I'm interested in like the very kind of substance, like what we become under duress. I think that we live in a time that is very, you know, it's a, you know, maybe every single time, maybe every time historically speaking has been like this, but there's, you know, there feels to me to be kind of intense kind of occupations of our bodies, whether or not we know them or not. And so what happens to like the physical form? Like how does it change, and how is it forced to kind of mutate based on that, you know, those facts, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes,
In the chapbook pieces, the references to research and so forth, are those referenced in the book, and you give credit for those? Or?
Yeah, they're so there. I never remember the whole title, so I'll just read to you. So the borrowed text is, so sometimes it's directly borrowed, and sometimes it's manipulated, and sometimes it's erased from. The article, because it's authored, but there's no name for the author, so there's no real citation problem with that. But Frederick Starr's The Degeneracy of the American Negro, J.L.M. Curry's The Negro Question, and Frederick Hoffman's Race Traits and the Tendencies of the American Negro are the ones that are excerpted at some length.
Because it reminds me of vinyl scratching in hip hop, and I always, you know, I have a problem with that. Sometimes it's given credit to, and sometimes it isn't. But it adds a great depth to it. I like that. I didn't quite even get beyond that in your reading.
Yeah.
I was so involved in your first piece.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, I think, they're excerpted pointedly, and in the new context, I mean, I think, we poets steal all the time. So we're very, I think copyright law kind of mandates that, some things do be credited. But I think in their new context that they have a different, that there's some difference in the meaning, right? That they're kind of excerpted from these like long, or sometimes short kind of treatises on, how the Negro is. And I love the degeneracy of the American Negro as a title for anything. It's like, what? Why read on? But but in the new context, there's a difference. Yeah.
Do your students then excerpt your lines and go,
Um,
or how would you?
Well, I would feel great. I have had people, not necessarily my students, but others, excerpt my lines. I think my students would feel too, they don't want to be like with their heads up my ass, so they don't want to, you know what I mean? It would just be too weird for them. But other folks have. Yeah, I think it's great. It's like homage. I mean, there's a certain kind of intertextuality that's apparent, which I like.
Great questions. Yes. I have a question, I guess.
I'm actually a little deaf, so I'm just going to walk this way to hear you.
A question about maybe the different approaches to writing, like in discipline, where you said they're all prose poems, I believe?
Mostly.
Mostly prose poems, and I felt like the way you're reading that, there was a certain unbroken urgency maybe in the way, at least for the first two pieces that you were reading, whereas the chapbook was a bit different, a bit more spaced out. So I'm wondering in terms of your writing, where when you're writing using the borrowed text as opposed to writing without maybe consciously using borrowed text, how do you kind of, I guess, work through that spell, I guess, when you're working on a collection? How do you kind of enter into that where it's still you?
Oh,
Both plays.
Well, I mean, as kind of like the difference between like using borrowed text and not borrowed text, and something about it, that it all kind of feels like it's me, or it might not. I mean, for me, it all feels like me. Like that borrowed text, it's mine now. Like I feel like it's mine, right? And so, I think that the form that needs to, for me, I'm not interested in kind of formal poetry engagements or the way the poem looks on the page that is not directly attentive to what is being said, right? So there's a way in which, that's my real work in those like borrowed text moments, is to figure out how is this going to look and what's going to bracket it, what's going to contextualize it, what is it like up against? I've discovered about myself of late that I'm really, like a poet like Alice Notley. I mean, every single one of her books is so different. She's really invested in this kind of like reinvention, really, of like what it is she's doing like all the time. And I love that. I think that I'm an Aries with a Leo rising and a Leo moon. So, I mean, my attention is like, I'm like a crazy person. So it's like I can get really bored with like just writing it like one way. So I'm really interested in just kind of like rethinking what a poem is like all the time with each new book, each new project.
I guess, do you think maybe readers and writers who are a little more familiar with expressing a sense of being or getting to know somebody else's sense of being already in like a disembodied way, do you think that could be more imposing on someone because it's on their very sense of being?
Wait, can you say that in a different way?
I'm not sure.
Because, I mean, in one way, you're totally blowing my mind. In another way, I'm not sure how to answer it.
Well, when you're talking about how the body, we only recognize that when it's under attack or feeling stress. I guess in the same way, I see somebody's recognition of their being constituted by values that are put to test. When their ideas are being attacked, then they get a stronger idea of who they are. And I know as readers, we usually want to understand what is being written as writers. The same. So,
Oh, this question about comprehension, about understanding?
yeah, the presumptions that somebody might make about somebody's
don't know. I don't know if I believe in essences, but I do believe in comprehension. So, I'll say that, like, what I really think is that, like, we invented this amazing thing called language, and, every word actually, there's no, what I tell my students all the time is that what I don't believe in is nonsense. I don't believe there's anything called nonsense, because the moment that you place two words next to each other, you have some meaning, right? The words actually have definitions, they have histories, et cetera, right? So, I mean, I think how do people relate to that, and how people kind of like enter that experience of language is really, up to them in a way. I'm probably not answering your question, but what it makes me think that, like, so I like, I like a kind of labor, I like a kind of work when I read. It's like my preference. When things are presented to me, like, when somebody gives me, like, I'd rather make like a 5-course dinner than have somebody just hand me like a roasted lamb, I'd rather, even though in that process of making that 5-course dinner, I've become overwhelmed and I'm like, oh shit, and the guests are waiting and there I am kind of like, I've had too much whiskey, you know what I mean? I'm just like, oh my God, this is gonna be a disaster. But, I like that kind of tension as far as a participatory experience of life. I don't know about the essence question. I'm not sure I understand it, although I was right with you there for a while. I was kind of thinking about just, kind of the way that people connect, like what makes them connect and how they know each other, right? Which is a kind of spiritual question in a way. I think that we think we know somebody, we feel this kind of like spiritual connection, but it is unknowable, and it's just like a feeling. I don't know what that has to do with the other question in my mind, so I'll just answer them separately like that.
Great. We have time for one more question or comment. Yes, thank you.
I like the way that Joanne started with the corporality of your poetry, but my mind was actually looking at the emotional impact of those things. And I see your poems fitting so well in that intersection between public and private.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder, when you're writing, do you ever shy away from something because you know it will go public?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I feel more comfortable in the realm of the poem or in writing than I do in the realm of like speech, and so I feel like, so for me, in some ways it feels very different to write something than it does to say something. Like I write things I would never say, ordinarily. I write things I wouldn't tell my best friends sometimes, but then there it is in this poem that I'm reading, so it's different. I don't know, yeah. But thanks.
Thank you all for being such a thoughtful
Thank you.
audience, and thank you, Dawn Lundy.
Thank you.